Our guest today is an accomplished and inspiring leader, Sunil Geness. Sunil works as a director at SEP. He occupies an interesting mix of portfolios, which include government affairs, corporate social responsibility, and sustainability. He's also got a very rich history, having worked in both the private and public sectors, and has had the opportunity to work with multilateral agencies such as the UN, the World Bank, BRICS, and the AU. Sunil is also passionate about youth and community development, and is here to talk to us about impactful leadership. You've had a busy day today, Sunil.
Indeed, a very busy day. It seems like it's a Monday all over again, although it's Tuesday after Easter.
Yeah.
And everybody's got back to the office, so to speak.
Yeah, it's a business Monday.
Absolutely.
Let's call it that.
Absolutely.
Welcome
Thank
to
you
the
so
show,
much.
and thank you for being here with us.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so we're gonna kick off by you just telling us about you. Who are you when you're not working and achieving all these amazing things?
Well, when I'm not involved in the work environment, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a community activist, and I suppose that's where I get my greatest joys in life, being able to impact the community and make a difference in the community collectively, and keeping in mind that, you know, every step that we take forward, we're creating a legacy, not for ourselves, but for the next generations that are coming through.
Yeah, I must say anything that I've come across that talks about you, talks about that purposefulness in what drives you as a person, as a leader, and even in the community work that you do. Very impressive.
Indeed. And I think that also stems from the culture that I grew up into, which was, you know, during the apartheid era. Growing up, community was a very important block that was able to give us stability during those times, and multifaceted, multiracial in nature. And stemming out of that, I think that became something that's emblazoned in my personality from an early age. I myself was a beneficiary of that community, and it made a lot of sense to give back. And I come from the Hindu culture, you know, and in Sanskrit, the word seva, if it's translated loosely, is service.
Yeah.
And I'm sure many people watch the movie Eat, Pray, Love.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate part of why we're actually on this planet. If we look through our own lives and where our greatest joys come from, the materiality will come and go. But the impact that we leave behind and the impact that we have on the environment, humans, the next generations, this is where our greatest source of inspiration comes from.
Yeah. How have you been able to maintain that kind of ethos in the current context? I mean, I'm sure you've mentioned that it was instilled in you in childhood as you grew up. And I'm sure you know that the communities that we live in right now are very different from that. How have you maintained that, and what are you doing to spread basically the same approach?
That's a very interesting question, because and I should emphasize, I grew up in a community where people looked like me, they were brown-skinned, etc. Now I live in a community where I am an actual minority, and everyone around me is probably Caucasian.
Yeah.
And I think that community, understanding the common pain points of the community, irrespective of race, class, creed, etc., and being able to address situations that impact not only myself, my own family, but the entire community, and being able to delve into the mindsets of the human. Because ultimately, if we strip everything off, we all remain with fundamentals, irrespective of what our backgrounds are. And those fundamentals are key, and it goes back to Maslow's hierarchy. We want to be nurtured, we want to feel safe, we want to feel part of a community, and we want to have a higher sense of thinking. And if you understand that's what makes up the ethos of humans, you'll be able to reflect that very easily, because we all have that within us.
Yeah.
Tom Cruise mentioned the Ubuntu factor when he went back to Hollywood.
Really nice.
And after he did a recent, not so recent trip to South Africa.
Yeah.
And I think Ubuntu and the concept of conviviality and humans and what they represent is the driving force that brings us together. And that's how we'll find common ground. Nelson Mandela, when he was released from prison, he leaned heavily on these concepts. He called them other things, but he leaned heavily on this. The media and the advertising industry moved that to a rainbow nation. But essentially, what he was talking about is a fact that light is made up of those different aspects of the spectrum, and there are different colors in there, but when they all combine, they form natural light, which you can't see those colors. And that's what our society is about. And we need to continuously place energy, particularly now at the fulcrum of where we are globally as well, and what we're seeing happening.
Yeah. I know you have a foundation. Tell us a little bit more about your foundation and what you do through it.
Well, the foundation is an inspiration from my wife, who is a medical doctor, and she came to me around the early 20s and said, look, we have benefited and we've moved ourselves and lifted ourselves by the straps of our boots. And now it's time for us to assist the following generations to come through. So in 2013, we set up our family foundation, the Ganes Foundation. And we thought about the foundation from a perspective of a virtuous cycle. If you take a human, we didn't analyze it too much, but a human is born and they need to be nurtured. So therefore, health is important. Once they're nurtured, they're able to go to school. And education was the second factor that we focused on. And then after education, they would then look to be employed or become an entrepreneur. So we focus on entrepreneurship. And then only you consider the leisure part, which is playing golf and so on. So that was the fourth, sort of pillar, which was sport. And the foundation has been established since 2013. It's been running for over a decade. We have impacted thousands of lives, from giving access to the best teaching capacity to public schools in physics and mathematics to our foundation, to supporting girls in Oprah Winfrey School, over several years, not only in the school itself, but those who came through the rank and file and passed matric going to university. Some of them are graduates. We receive letters from these children.
Yeah.
And as you know, at Oprah School, the kids are selected from very difficult backgrounds across the country. And for us, it's also a humbling experience for our daughters to be able to go there and see what it takes to get to that level. So these are just some of the things that we focus on. And the foundation, through the Ganes Foundation as well, my community where I currently live have benefited from that, because I also set up in the neighborhood the James and Ethel Gray Park Foundation, which benefited from funding and capacity building from our foundation to secure that space. And we'll continuously, till we leave this planet, I suppose, drive energy into the foundation, its work. But the focus is on the girl child.
Yeah.
Obviously I'm biased at home. I have my two daughters and my wife, but the focus is on the girl child.
Yeah. Very good work. Thank you for your contribution to building the nation.
Thank you.
And for doing it as long as you have. And the fact that the foundation has sustained itself since 2013 says a lot about how you're leading it, managing it, and ensuring that all the right things are done to sustain it and not just contribute in the now.
Absolutely.
Well done. And
Thank you.
I hope it grows from strength to strength.
It is. We always have collaborations. The essential thing is with the foundation as well, is that the funding in the foundation stems from my wife and I. And we've always been approached by bigger corporates. We'll come in, we'll do this, we'll do that. We've said, look, when we need you, we will reach out to you. We're not turning you away. But for now, we believe the programs are adding value. And the whole aspect behind the foundation is also about the difference rather than the publicity of the difference.
Yeah.
And I very rarely, in fact, this is probably the first time I'm speaking, on camera about our foundation and what we do, because the whole purpose is to serve people.
Yeah. I was reading recently, I think it was an article where they were interviewing, who's this French player? He doesn't play anymore. But he was talking about the work that Lionel Messi is doing.
Oh, yes.
And he really expressed the same ethos. He made huge donations, achieved some medical things in South Africa from 2010. And he refused to have his name mentioned in any of the work that is done. And it's only because we do through this gentleman that I can't remember for whatever reason. And I love him. I don't know why I can't remember him.
I'm sure the name will come to mind sooner rather than later.
Yeah. So focus on the work, forget the publicity, get the things done that need to be done.
The one thing I suppose that remains at the forefront of the mind, about 8 or 10 years ago, I was in Sandton. And I was in a restaurant, and there was a young man that came there. He was very eloquent, energetic, all of that. And I said to him then, listen, you've got potential, and I believe you'll go to the next level. And these are the things, and this is the support we can potentially give you, and so on. I'd forgotten about that. Last year, I got a message on some platform. And the guy said, listen, this is where we met.
Wow.
Today, I'm in this technology industry. I'm in a process-orientated environment. And I only did this the day that you spoke to me. Was the day I realized if someone else believed in me, I should believe in myself.
Yeah.
And I think that's a conversation we're not having enough of out there.
Powerful.
Our youth in this country, we have a youthful population. We have highly intelligent human beings, be it in the most rural areas to the most urban areas. But they're not being told that there should be belief in them. You take someone like, a rapper like Tupac in his time.
Yeah.
He believed in himself, despite
absolutely.
the fact that he came from...
With good reason.
Exactly. From a very difficult background. Of course, it's a different example we're using. But they need to be reinforced in terms of their thinking. And that in this digital era, the ability for you to scale and become relevant is so much easier.
Yeah.
You think about the time you and I went to school. Social media didn't exist.
Yeah.
Your ability to earn an income in ways beyond the traditional means of labor were not there. And that's where the real opportunity lies for our youth in this country.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. I mean, aside from just the soul in everything that you've said, I'm seeing why your career is looking the way that you do. Tell us a little bit about that. You've got a fascinating career, the role that you play, the spaces you move in.
Thank you. It's been an absolute journey, and it's been a blessing.
Yeah.
I started my career off as a teacher, teaching physics, math, and electronics. These are my first loves. And that was just pre the democratic dispensation in our country. And it was a wonderful time to see human beings grow. And I say, today people are talking about artificial intelligence. I taught young people in that time about the bits and the bytes and everything that went together to make up the ability to drive artificial intelligence today through electronics.
Yeah.
All right. And it was a precursor to so many different things, robotics itself, and where we seeing ourselves going with machine learning and artificial intelligence today. And I was there, and of course, that was, in the early 90s. I then quit teaching to take up a career in the South African government. I had a few options to either work in the Department of Transport, Public Service, or Social Development. And I chose public service.
Yeah.
And I went to a department where the late Dr. Zola Squia also became our ambassador to the UK, was the minister at the time. And it was a fabulous time because it was just the period after Mandela was there for a few years, and he was winding down his first term. And I got to work with apartheid leaders.
Yeah.
Wasn't easy at the time. Working with some of them. Remember, some of these people were in Caspers during that time, and they were decimating our people in townships like Soweto and so on. But the leaders around me at that time said to me that, look, we're in a period of where we are reconciling so many different things. And one needed to understand, and the emotionality during that time was on a very high level. You was much younger during that time. It took a lot to remain calm and listen to people. And also that taught me a lot about listening to people and being able to understand what they're saying, even though they're coming from a diametrically opposed viewpoint from you.
Yeah.
And I think those periods of being able to remain calm, it really assisted in my own development and understanding other people.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me, while I was in the Department of Public Service and Administration, I was identified as a top talent during that time and given many opportunities. I got to work across the country from, working in some of the townships to working in Eastern Cape for a while. I was deployed there to work with the Eastern Cape government in the 90s and assist then Reverend Stofile Makankisa, who's late now, of course, was a premier in re-establishing the public service and working on regulations. And then I came back and then I had a new task, which was basically to find a way to manage the top civil servants in the country. And I then set up the senior management service today, which is in government, your directors general to director upwards, and managing the whole process from recruiting them to actually exiting them from the system. And maybe then fast forward, I then spent time there, worked on e-government, worked at the state IT agency. So I had the parastatal, I had the national, I had the provincial, I worked at the city level. And guess what? The only thing left at that point was to look at the private sector.
Yeah.
And 20 years ago, almost 21 years to date, I got the call from SAP to join SAP, which has been an incredible journey over the last sort of 2 decades. I mean, I'm just summarizing this. I mean, there's so much that happened in between. And all of these roles have engendered something in me which has led to where I am now.
Yeah.
Understanding humans, working across the racial divide, working across the culture divide, the language divide, working across the continent. That's also, before joining SAP, obviously I'd done a lot of work on the continent. There was a NEPAD at the time, which was a new partnership for Africa's development, and President Becky was very much involved with that.
Yeah.
So that's the sort of, in a nutshell, the career, so to speak.
Yeah. I'm listening to you and the amount of time you've spent in the public sector, and I'm thinking you are very courageous. I think public sector and I want to run. But in more seriously, I mean, we need so many more people to be prepared to work in the public sector, because all of us sit and complain about what's going wrong in the public sector, but we're not prepared to go contribute there.
And I think, to your point, when I was involved with putting together the policy for the senior management service, that's exactly what I had in mind. Because I created for the first time mobility where private sector can actually second people to the public sector.
Yeah.
I created within that framework the ability for public sector officials to go on sabbatical and experience time in the private sector.
Yeah.
Learning and development, training and development, and so on. But public sector is a calling. I think during that euphoria period, we're talking Mandela, we're talking Becky's period.
Madiba's magic.
Madiba's magic. Money was not the thing.
Yeah.
It was, I'm going to go in there and make a difference, and I'm going to serve to ensure that this public service serves the population of this country, not a minority, the entire population. And in so doing, to lift our country as a rainbow nation, as it was called at that time. And so much has happened in that period. When we look back, we had the World Cup in 2010 that took place. We had the Cricket World Cup, 2003 in this country. We had AFCON that took place. These were like beacons that kept reminding us that we were good enough and whatever we were fighting for and putting our shoulder behind was for the benefit of the country. And I suppose those reflections will always burn very brightly.
Yeah. And what's broken? What's gone wrong since then? And how do we get back there?
There's a few items that we can put our finger on, in terms of where we are currently. And some of it is a result of technology, I'll be very honest. So let's start with the youth because, we can mold them even further. With the youth, I think this idea of instant gratification and bright lights and Hollywood lights and being an influencer and what that means in today's society is something that we really need to rationalize out to them. And that starts in the family unit.
Yeah.
And the family unit is about instilling a value system in them that makes sense and that will give them the platform to go to the next level. And our value systems have become murky.
Yeah.
In our country, if you look at the majority, parents are away working. What are kids doing when they come back home in the afternoon? We're not too sure about that.
Yeah.
What access do they have? Today, with the internet being on a mobile phone, there's so much that we in our lifetimes at that age would not see that these kids are able to see. So it speaks about that. Then the second thing is the entitlement. I speak to young kids sometimes and they say, I'm disadvantaged. They're wearing an outfit which costs about 5,000 or 6,000 rand. And the person says to you, they're disadvantaged.
Yeah.
And I very politely explain to them what my definition of disadvantage is, and they don't get it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's that entitlement. The third thing is that there is almost 100% correlation between people who struggle in life and their success.
Yeah.
Where is the struggle today?
Yeah.
That's a question we need to ask ourselves.
Yeah.
Are our young people struggling? What are they struggling with?
Yeah.
Parents go out of their way to do whatever, give them whatever, to put them on that platform. So the struggle is reduced. So I say that's where we need to focus on youth. I'm not saying let's put them through the worst times and so on, but let's challenge them.
Yeah.
Let them help themselves, right, to understand that. So that's the three things. And the fourth thing is around the education. Now, there are people who agree and disagree that you need tertiary education. Ultimately, whatever you're educated about should help you to earn a living, but it should be solving a world problem.
Yeah.
Right? It was easier nowadays, there were set careers and so on. Now the careers coming up through to tech that people only find out in the next 5 to 10 years. Then those young people understanding that they exist in a global economy. We've never been more globalized than we are today.
Yeah.
And guess what? Today and tomorrow will be a more globalized world. And understanding that you're not competing with 59 million other people in a country like South Africa.
More than 7 billion.
More like 7, could be 8 billion. People say we've underestimated it. So I think that realization, but also with the youth just coming back, is for them to be fearless. COVID has had an impact on people and the way they think and their mental wellness and so on. So I think those factors have contributed to certain stresses in the youth.
Yeah.
So what's wrong with society today? Or in South Africa? People are interested in living in their homes, being safe and focusing on their patches.
Yeah.
But if you go back to time immemorial, that's not how communities lived. People worked as a collective. You think today we have, a lottery system that exists in our communities.
Yeah.
Right? And why does it exist? Because we lent on each other. And I think that fragmentation on bringing yourself to individualism is what drives certain behaviors. And that's meism. That's about focus on the self, materiality, not understanding that you've been put here for a purpose.
Yeah.
Your life on this planet has been defined, it's been written, your journey has been written. So I suppose those aspects is where we've gone wrong. And then, our democracy is a growing democracy. It's still very young.
Yeah.
The GNU being in place has its checks and balances, as opposed to having one party like the ANC who has been in power for a while and driving things in the country. And those checks and balances are there, and it's bringing its own challenges, as we're seeing now, even in policy making, in the budget and so on. So if we just high level look at things, that's how I would say that's the state of the nation at the moment.
Yeah. So just two things on the issue around youth, particularly around our the attitudes towards entitlement and being disempowered, disadvantaged, and all of that. What role are we as the adults playing in that? Because if anything, as you were saying that, I was trying to think, and I'm not absolving them of any responsibility for being there, but I mean, are the youth not emulating us in a sense in those things? Are we not educating them in those things? Have we not set an example for them to be those things? And even if they do go wrong, what is our responsibility in directing them in a different direction?
We, as a generation who's have come through democracy and who've evolved, who've become educated and in social and global and wherever we are, we underwent a growth process. By us giving these kids things that are ahead of their time, what we're doing is we are stunting that growth process.
Yeah.
And why is it that when you have a scar and it heals, it'll always be there to remind you? The same with the growth process.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to us, we want to make things easier for our kids. But if you reflect on our parents and what they did, they did as much as they could at the time, and they left you to fend for yourselves.
Indeed.
And I think that's where there's a balancing act. Watching a young person fail is not something which brings any joy. But they have to be allowed to fail to a point, because we only remember our failures. Every time you've done well, do you remember every time you've done well?
Not every single instance.
Not every single instance. But you remember the failures in life.
Absolutely.
And I say, not enough people have failed enough in life to understand how those failures actually assist you in overcoming the next hurdles.
Yeah. So we're cushioning the youth too much, and we're robbing them of an opportunity to grow resilience. And I guess it goes back to what you were saying earlier, that, you sat in a context where you had to hear different views, opposing views that were far from what you were, but what that taught you is your ability basically to sit quietly and hear and then process your thinking a little bit more. There was nobody to cancel you, as an example.
Exactly, yeah. There was no cancel culture.
And as much as we understand and support in some instances, where the origins of that culture, it does, I feel, I agree with you, that it robs you of that character building, of saying, just because I'm saying something different and you don't like it, it doesn't mean that I'm less than and I'm less worthy of being heard than what you are. You don't get to own the space more than I do just because, you stand on a particular line and politically correct.
Absolutely. And therein lies a respect factor. This concept of Ubuntu is about self-respect.
Yeah.
We've also lost respect in our different circles, the way we communicate and so on. And I think we need to bring that into the fold, because those are the sort of building blocks that are the most stable. When earthquakes come, societal earthquakes, able to keep us in position. And to the point of differences, the most difficult thing to do is to listen to an opposing view of your own. Because you're not wired for that.
Yeah.
But yet, in listening to the other person, you're able to see things from a different angle.
Yeah.
You're able to understand that person and get to the ethos of what that person is about. And I think we need to spend more time around those things, that understanding our own humanity. Because with technology and it's racing ahead and so on and so forth, the aspects of honing our humane skills and what makes us humane is receding.
Yeah. It's a challenging thing to do, though, even as we say the things that you say. Where do we draw the lines, for instance? Because some people use that as an opportunity, for instance, to spew hate speech, as an example. Where do we draw the lines? How do we go about making those determinations?
I think that's a difficult thing on its own. Look, censure is a thing that, we've seen that with X and the kind of censure that happened there. There are people who thrive on anonymity.
Yeah.
So being behind a keyboard and being a keyboard warrior is what they can do every day. But once they're exposed out there and they're made to understand that what they're doing is a unitary way of thinking, they may reconsider what they're doing. We have democracy, which is there. We live in a democratic state, so to speak. The world has become more democratized over time. Freedom of speech is enshrined in the Constitution. So the framework is there for people to be able to communicate. Now, moderating that, I won't use the word censure.
Yeah.
How is it moderated? It's moderated through society.
Yeah.
Because why is it that someone in a mall will not do something which is something that do while they're walking through a park?
Yeah.
Like throw a cigarette stub. They won't do that in the mall. Why? Because society is there to watch them. Then if you just finalize that and take it to the final point, it's about what people do when no one else is watching. And that talks about moral fiber.
I've really enjoyed that. So you've shared about openness to otherness and not being so threatened about hearing something different. But essentially as well, you're saying necessity remains the mother of invention. If we're too comfortable,
absolutely,
yeah, we're robbing ourselves of the benefit of growth. Yeah.
Fully. And there must be something for you to strive for. You need to be motivated. Intrinsic motivation needs to be there. How is that created? When you're striving for something out there.
Yeah.
And remembering in that time to be respectful of the environment, the humans that you engage with, and the society that you live in.
Yeah. Sunil, let's then talk about the work that you do. What do you do? What difference does the work that you do make?
Thanks a lot for that. So in my daily work, I'm at SAP. I handle sort of two key portfolios. The one is government affairs for SAP in the African continent in English-speaking countries. And the other portfolio is our corporate social responsibility that we drive. On the government affairs side, work there's a multiplicity of levels. I could be talking to a president today, and the very same day I could be talking to somebody who is a janitor in a public service building as I enter. So there's a whole range of levels of people that one communicate with during that process. But that is the most humbling experience, because the respect you give the person that is at the lowest level of the echelon to the highest is the same level.
Yeah.
Everyone's a human. They have feelings, they have a job to do, you have a job to do, and that respect factor. And in giving effect to that job, you learn a lot about humans.
Yeah.
And I've been blessed with the gift, and that gift is to very quickly be able to strike resonance with humans, other humans.
Yeah.
Not about money, not about work, not about selling whatever I'm wearing, just resonance.
Yeah.
So that's the one area, and it can be as complicated as we want it to be and as simple as we want it to be. Then the other area is our corporate social responsibility. As a technology company, we are constantly striving to engender the communities that we work in to be able to become empowered with technology.
Yeah.
And at SAP, we have this, our purpose is to help the world run better and improve people's lives. So we want to take that tagline and put it into real perspective. And we have a number of programs, that we implemented. The one program was the Africa Code Read program, which we started around 2014. And it was a precursor to the AI as you see it now. We taught something like just under 24 million young people across 54 countries in Africa to code. And the one example I remember, I went to Rwanda and I went into a mountain. And at that time, I had Mikasa with me, the South African group that accompanied us. And we taught these children who hadn't even seen a camera, let alone a phone, to code within 45 minutes. And what that proved is that irrespective of the background, if you give people opportunity, they'll be able to grow.
Sunil, that's not a very good thing for me to hear. My son just qualified with an information technology degree.
Wow.
And he's a coder. But it took him 3 years to do that, and you did it in 45 minutes.
Wow, there's different levels. Of course, there's different levels. So your son, he's probably done a lot of the coding languages, which are more complicated. We taught those kids on freely available MIT Scratch.
Yeah.
It was basic coding and so on. Yeah. So that's one of the programs. Another program that we're very proud of is what we call our Young Professionals Program. And that program is essentially taking graduates. We bring them into the program. It's actually an employment program. We identify jobs in our customer base, our partner base, and then we capacitate those graduates to fulfill those roles. When they finish with the actual training, they go straight into a job.
Yeah.
And we say, if we gave you 18 months salary, it's your job to make it beyond 18 months.
Yeah.
Our retention rate is about 98%. The other 2% are gone globally.
Wow.
And then we have another program which I think is worth mentioning is our Educate to Employ program.
Yeah.
And there we take at-risk kids, which means they haven't been to a university, college, but they just have burning desire to do something in technology. And graduates, we bring them in, we get them certified through our learning hub, and then they become job ready to enter the market as SAP consultants working in different spaces. So that's the second area. The third area that I'm actively involved with at SAP as well is our sustainability drive. I'm a sustainability champion for SAP. And that speaks to a range of things, from what we do in our buildings, smart utilization of electricity, water, our practices as SAP, as a company, single use of plastics, and driving that collectively. I'm not the only one, with other colleagues who work with me towards a situation where we consistently reduce our footprint in terms of what we bring to the market.
Yeah. I haven't seen that combination of roles in one portfolio, or at least in one person before.
That was interesting because my role, and it's well known now in the SAP world, it was the very first time that they combined the government affairs role and the corporate social responsibility role, because they're literally two sides of the same coin. Yeah. Because when you go to see government, the first question is, what have you done lately for our people? And the answer is very simple. Here's job creation that has happened. Here's skills development that has happened. Here is the difference that we made in the communities through our employees. So that was the very first role globally in SAP that was set up. And since then, we've had a few other colleagues who are also fulfilling these roles. We have the same in the Middle East, North Africa. We have a colleague of mine who's running on a similar sort of matrix with government affairs and CSR.
There were other options available, though, in terms of crafting that. Is your passion for community development, maybe, and sustainability, did it have something to do with the decision?
I would think so.
Yeah.
At the time. But it also made sense. SAP, interestingly, were one of the few multinationals who began running corporate social responsibility or social economic development before BE legislation was in place.
Yeah.
In fact, that was one of the main reasons why I joined the company. When I looked up and seen what they'd done in the 2004, and even before that, they were already investing.
Yeah.
Investing. And it wasn't window dressing. Yeah. It was investment in a graduate recruitment program. It was about bringing in new skill sets, backfilling, and making sure that Black African people per se were being given opportunities. And we've seen that in the 20 years that I've been there, we've had numerous, yes, people leave SAP, but they don't leave our ecosystem. They're either with a customer or a partner. And yes, they may be earning more, and in some cases, they may be running companies.
Yeah.
But that's exactly what we want to have. And maybe another aspect that I should mention as part of this journey is that the founder of SAP, he set up these design thinking centers around the world. And he set up the first one in Stanford, and that was followed up by one in Berlin. And more recently, he has established one in South Africa in the last sort of 8-9 years. And I now serve on that design thinking school, which is at the University of Cape Town. And design thinking obviously is a process where you look at any problem through empathetic eyes and looking at solving the problem and things like that. So it's about systems thinking. And that's also an amazing aspect because through this design thinking center, you also get to experience the world's problems. When companies come out there, you get a look-see into things that you would not normally in your general day-to-day life. It also enhances your view of the world and what is happening, problems, their solutions, and how we can address these problems as well.
Yeah. You do a lot of work as well, at least have a lot of involvement with multilateral agencies.
Correct.
Give us some insight into that.
Yes, that's quite an interesting area. When I came to SAP, obviously had this knowledge of how these multilateral agencies, because I'd been in government.
Yeah.
And the one which is the largest of the lot is obviously the United Nations and what they do. And increasingly, for example, this Educate to Employ program is a program that is driven together with UNICEF. And the actual CEO of SAP Worldwide actually sits as a chairperson of this Generation Unlimited. So the multilateral agencies, one needs to understand, is filled with diplomacy, is filled with rules, regulations, etc. What the private sector brings by partnering is being able to accelerate certain things through frameworks of implementation. And I've identified these multilaterals as opportunities for SAPs a long time ago. And we've seen now through, for example, Educate to Employ, how we may being able to partner and make a difference. Then you have the likes of your World Banks. The World Bank itself, which is a World Bank group, it has IMF in there. Then you have, other banks like African Development Bank, which is part of that, Latin American Development Bank and Asian Development Bank. And the idea there is to determine, as a private sector organization, how we can assist the countries that we work in to be able to access this blended finance, to be able to procure technology.
Yeah.
Because often when you go to speak to a government, a president, an ICT minister, they will tell you, look, we don't have money to feed our people, for example. I'm just using an exemplar. Now you want us to purchase this software which will help us in the long run, but how do we do that? And that's where the role of multilateral agencies becomes critical. because they're able to bring blended finance to these countries. Yes, the countries will owe them, like they would to get a soft loan, but in that process, they'll be able to modernize. And the whole idea behind Africa is that if Africa modernizes, we become a bigger destination for investment.
Yeah.
There's more transparency that's put in place. What that then means is that we have more multinationals, we have more private sector and other industries investing. So that is how I see the roles of the multilateral organizations. They, of course, are heavily involved in Africa because of some of the feuds that have been running for a long time. But many of them, these organizations are doing great work, like the World Food Program in East Africa in the past decade have done a great job. And then you look at some of the peacekeeping that is happening on the continent. It's driven through the UN. And therein again lies the opportunities for Africa to grow. So I see them as a catalyst to Africa going into the next century.
Yeah. And what are some examples that you can share with us of where they've enabled Africa to progress in whatever direction?
Human lives saved, for me, is like a most fundamental thing that we can ever do. So if we save a life through medicine, or we save a life to providing protection to that human being, it's an essential thing because we retain the integrity of the population, and therein lies the means to achieve things. So UN has been doing a lot of peacekeeping on the continent. South Africa itself has been part and parcel of providing sort of capacity towards that. So that's the one thing. In other places, the UN combines forces with donor agencies like the Mo Ibrahim Foundation, for example. I'm just using that, right? Or with other foundations around the world to drive initiatives around education. UNICEF is doing a lot of work in that regard to drive education and ensure that young people are educated and retained in school. Then when you come to issues of child mortality, the World Health Organization is driving considerable amount of work on the African continent around that. And yes, during COVID times, there was a polarization in the availability of vaccines to Africans and so on and so forth. But those matters have balanced out. And I think the UN itself has identified through Guterres, who's the current Secretary General, that it's Africa-centric.
Yeah.
And the world is realizing that if they don't come to Africa and if Africa is not nurtured, that's where the majority of the next billion population is going to emerge from. That the entire globe is going to be impacted because we have the most youthful population and they need to be upskilled and made ready to take up their rightful positions in Europe, in United States, in Asia, and in other parts of the world. So there is work that is going on. It's a pity some of this work is not well published. But as you travel Africa, and as I do come across the outputs of this work.
Yeah. And South Africa, where is it positioned on that front?
South Africa is seen as a middle income country. And you know how they classify, they have these least developed countries, and that's like no infrastructure, no water, no electricity, and so on. So the United Nations is funded through funding from states, right? And it's based in the United States because it gets quite a bit of big chunk from the US and other countries. So we as a country, I don't think that we at the highest priority of these multilateral agencies. But because South Africa is chairing the G20 currently, number of these UN organizations are acting as knowledge partners to South Africa. They may not be bringing the money, but they're bringing all the intellectual property to bear so that South Africa as a government can give effect to the similar sort of outcomes.
Yeah. Moving forward, what is your vision for South Africa, for Africa, in the spaces that you operate in?
My vision for South Africa is focused on capacitating people. capacitating them so that they're ready for the next level. Next level being in terms of technology, their lives, being able to become a population that has food security, which is one of the biggest things, and protecting our natural resources. So that, if South Africa focuses on that, our competitiveness alone in Southern Africa will be through the roof.
And focusing on that means doing what, practically?
That we need better governance around decision cycles that we take. Transparency in those decisions when those decisions are made. And most importantly, monitoring and evaluation of where we are, right? Then, if we transcend that to Africa, Africa has got the youngest population. It will continue to grow to become one of the largest. We need to move towards bigger industrialization on the African continent. And the industrialization doesn't have to mean that we have to come up with new industries. We can industrialize agrarian crop production. Africa can be the breadbasket for the entire world.
Yeah.
We have the largest rivers that flow in Africa. We have hydroelectric power that is available. We have large pools of methane gas that are available. We still have the greatest mineral resources available in the globe. So it's about protecting that and the different African countries' sovereignty being protected. And then the African Union in all of this has a role to play. That on peacekeeping together with the multilateral organizations, because if peace reigns in Africa, growth and progress will definitely follow.
Yeah. And what would need to be done to cultivate that peace?
We've seen now that the African Union has come up with this free trade accord, right?
Yeah.
When are people at war? When there's a scarcity of resources, right? So with this free trade agreement, if countries identify what their resources are and what they're able to sell off to other countries and intra-African trade grows, we'll see infrastructure growing. We'll see bigger mobility of Africans around the continent. We'll definitely see economic growth that follows out of that. And Africa's prosperity will continue to grow out of that. This is the blueprint of how this will be driven. Remember, when the World War happened, the major forces got together and they split Africa up, divided around different lines, and families were separated, and so on and so forth. And the Bretton Woods organizations came into being, which was actually a master plan to recapitalize Europe. What master plan has there been to recapitalize Africa since colonialism has evaporated from the different countries? Some African countries have been forced to go with the begging bowl around certain things. Yet, countries outside of Africa have removed resources, benefited it outside Africa, and resold it at factors of 10, 15, and 100 back to Africa. So the fairness in trade and the fairness in opportunity also need to be addressed at the World Trade Organization level, where we have a Nigerian, a former minister of Nigeria and a former World Bank official, Honorable Ngozi, who runs and is the Director General. And we can see that she's driving that agenda to bring this egalitarianship or leveling. With Africa and the trade volumes being so low in the past, it was only a matter of time before she became Director General. But she's been a finance minister, she's been at the World Bank. She understands the whole world of trade and direction. And while she's wearing a global hat, of course, deep down, she's African. And Africa, like any other continent, has also got to fight for its own rights.
Absolutely.
You know, nothing is going to be just given to us on a platter. So we need the next levels of your Dangotes to be developed. Dangote being one of the richest people on this continent, and having set up multilateral organization of his own, which basically is diversified, and so on and so forth. We need to see the next technology entrepreneurs coming through. We need to see the next health professionals come through. And glamour is not what we should be looking for.
Yeah. And we are seeing some positive movements forward in some areas. Maybe not enough.
We're seeing, I'll use one example. Tyler is a global talent, right? She's African, South African. She epitomizes South Africa like very few people can do, just based on her background and so on and so forth. And she's shown that in an era of social media, how she was able to elevate herself from being somebody who lived in Johannesburg and a young teenager and then becoming a global star. Of course, the song that she sang became famous because of the TikToks and all of that that you had in place. So therein lies the opportunity. Our young people need to capitalize on those aspects. But whilst
your daughters are doing a brilliant job, by the way.
Your
daughters are doing a brilliant job. You're so conversant about Tiger.
I'm a fan of Tyler, actually.
Oh, nice.
I'm a huge fan because I went to watch the show when she was here last year.
Yeah. You went when she was in Pretoria?
Yes, in Pretoria,
nice.
Indeed. Because we must support our African artists and our South African artists. And there's just something different. Also, it's proven that in South Africa, particularly the Western Cape, that we have the most diverse gene pool anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
It's a fact.
Yeah.
So out of that must come different things, new innovations, new thinking. There's so much to grow out of that, with that richness of diversity. And I think as South Africans, we sometimes underestimate. We can punch above our weights, as we've proven.
Yeah.
So many times. Our rugby team does that.
Oh, beautiful.
And you look at Drickus and what he's doing out there in the world of MMA. These are all iconic South Africans that, even up to today are doing some amazing. Akini Simbini set a world record here, I think this week, where 11 years in succession he's ran sub 10 second 100 meters.
Yeah.
And we have a young athlete who's a teenager who's burst on the scene recently. Yeah. So all these things augur very well for Africa.
So now I give you a magic wand
sure.
to transform South Africa and Africa. Where are you going to deploy the magic wand, and what would you do?
Our youth are critical. That's where it's a fulcrum. If you think about it, a seesaw, it has a fulcrum. Our future is determined by our youth. Yeah. But at the same time, the policies and practices that are defined by those that are in power now need to be adjusted so that it is pro-youth.
Yeah.
To be honest, we need more young people to get into politics. We need more young people to be in ministerial positions, directors general, be in positions of local government, provincial government, national government, Section 9 institutions, so they can bring the challenges of the youth to the fore.
Yeah.
And
just a different perspective.
Just a different perspective.
We can't have the same age group all the time making decisions about the future of the country. I mean, we're losing out so much.
Indeed. And just to that point, as you age, you get more fearful. It's a fact. Because remember, they say you're young and dumb.
Yeah.
Well, it's not young and dumb. You're young and fearless.
Yeah. Yeah.
Therefore, some of the actions you perform may be considered to be dumb, so to speak. Yeah. But your fear factor is down. So if you make decisions to fear, it's never the right decision. And the youth will challenge us. We need that youth brigade to come through. They need to challenge us. And those generations that have had their time must sit back and do some listening and reflection.
Yeah.
And allow the youth to come through for the one reason: we are evolving every day.
Yeah.
The best version of a human is the next generation.
Mhm.
So